Right, 11:30, and it's time to welcome you all to our third week of self-care series. And we have a very special treat for you today. Jade Brown, a counselling psychologist at Listening Well, will be talking to us about navigating relationships in a time of crisis. So I'm going to be welcoming her on shortly. And then she's going to give 40 minutes discussion with some lovely slides that she's going to be talking us through. Then we're going to go to a Q&A session for about 15 minutes where Marilise and I will join her and just discuss our input, our take on what she's presented. And then the last 5 minutes we will be talking to Marilise about next week's topic. So I'm going to be welcoming on Jade Brown and looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Here she is. Welcome,
Hello.
Jade.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
I'll just exit now and.
Okay, so now I'm alone on this stage, so to speak, and it's quite an interesting experience having an audience that you can't see, but having complete awareness that you are all there. So for those that are joining, please send a comment, like, just so that we know that you're there and that we can interact with you. Before we begin, I'm just going to almost orientate you a little bit to the process, some of the questions. Thank you, Tanya, for the slide. So some of the questions we will address a little bit later. So please send your questions. We will not, thank you, Carly. We will not neglect the questions. We'll try and answer all the questions that we can. And thank you so much for being part of this process. Okay, so today I'm using a slideshow. I don't want it to be like a lecture, but slides kind of help just to keep a process going and that it flows nicely. Okay, so today I'm talking about navigating relationships. Thank you, Tanya, for this slide. And I'm going to begin with what is so special about relationships. And when I thought of this question, hello, Ilsa. When I thought about relationships, I thought to myself, I don't have to do this alone. And I thought about pulling different resources. Some of my favorite resources are Brene Brown and Imago therapists and Harville Hendrix in particular that created Imago Therapy. But I also really realized is that there's so much local knowledge, there's so much wisdom that we haven't tapped into, we don't always put out there in these kinds of platforms. So what I did was I sent an SMS to a couple of people that I know that also really enjoy working with relationships. And I asked them, what makes relationships so special? Okay, and there's my husband joining. Thanks, Clinton. Okay, so the first point that I got from Joshua and Leila, he's a counseling psychologist here in Port Elizabeth. And something that I really, really liked about what he said is that intimacy is when the bond of understanding is intact. And that just makes so much sense. A lot of the time, we are disconnected by not understanding each other. We're disconnected by misunderstanding. And I really, really like that. He sent me so much. And I just wanted to get the essence out of what he said is that intimacy is when the bond of understanding is intact. And I want you to just sit with that for a little bit and really think about what it means. The bond of understanding is intact. Okay. And that creates a sense of intimacy. And I also asked a friend of mine, Lisa George, who's also a counseling psychologist here in Port Elizabeth, and she's very passionate about relationships. And I said, what makes relationships so special for you? And she got really excited and sent me a long voice note. And really, I could sense the passion that she has about relationships. And And something really special that she said is that relationships provide the opportunity for security. And I really think that that is something we need to give relationships their due, is it provides us, it can provide us, and sometimes not always, but there's the possibility that relationships can provide a sense of security, emotional, physical, psychological security, where you feel heard, you feel valued, you feel loved, um, and that creates a sense of security. And that really, being together, supporting one another, is a sense of security. And I think of, and I know my release will chat on trauma next week, is something very interesting that I heard is when people experience a trauma, the people who are able to get to this sense of security, their relationships, and feel safe again, tend to do better after a traumatic event. So relationships can be really, really powerful, and they are really special. And that's why we're doing this, or I'm doing this part of the talk, is just to open up the topic about what relationships are and why they're so special. So Tanya, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And with this one, maybe we can make it a bit bigger. Thank you. Okay, so with these two people, these are two very special people to me. Pastor Dion Vengadarajalam in East London at Child Fellowship. When I asked him, he was very happy to give me a quote. And he says that you can't expect the other to fit into a mold. You have to let go of what you think the other should be and give them the space to be themselves. And I love that. And I highlighted that word should. Tanya also mentioned it in our first talk, is that word should can be so limiting. When we have these expectations of our loved ones to put them into a box, we can almost limit their growth and limit our own experience of them. So I really love that. Thank you, Pastor Dion, for that. And he continues to say, so we have to give them the space to be themselves. And this could be exciting to discover as well. So you can get to discover who your partner, who your loved one, your son, your daughter, your in any relational context, to just to get to know who you have in front of you can really give a relationship so much more intimacy of understanding. Okay. And he continues then to say, your partner knows if you're sold out or not. And when you give your all, your partner can have a sense of that. And if you're holding back, they can have a sense of that. Marriage is like a fire that needs to be stoked all the time. It is an experience and a journey, not a destination. A lot of people think when you get to your wedding day, and we're talking in particular about marriage, that's the end in itself, and then you live happily ever after. But generally, that's the beginning, and it's quite a journey, definitely not a destination. So thank you so much for that, Pastor Dion. And then, and a really fitting quote at the moment by Pastor Mervyn Busak from the Family Revival Center here in Port Elizabeth. He says that a lack of respect is a lack of relationship. If you don't have a sense of respect and honor for another person, then it's very hard for a relationship to exist. And he gave his own personal testimony of, in finding a relationship with God, I discovered what true love is. There is no rejection. And therefore, we have given our lives, and he's talking about himself and his wife as well, to this work, because when a family is restored, and I really love this, a home is healed, which brings change to a community. So really having close relationships in your home can also have an impact on your community. And I really find that so special. And he sums it up by saying relationship is therefore the backbone of social development in our society. And that takes me to an understanding that, and if I think of what's happening in America at the moment, and and all the difficulty there. And it's a relational problem in a sense. Somebody's lost their lives at the hand of another, and that is relational. If we can all look at ourselves, and Prof. Ali, Professor Yassine Ali did a talk on Sunday, just talking about race and relationship and you as a person and all the different elements that put together who you are, and a call to just looking inward again and saying, how do I contribute, or who am I in the broad scheme of what's happening around me? And I really like Pastor Mervin's take is that when we find healing in ourselves, when we are able to respect and honor others, not reject, then that has a knock-on effect and a systemic effect basically around us. And I really, really like that relationship is there for the backbone of social development in our society. So we can speak about relationship in the context of family, couples, and in the broader context of society as well. Relationship is something that is so important. And I'm just going to have a sip of water while Tanya goes to our next slide. Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so there's a picture of myself and my hubby here. And the quote that I put up there is, life is not how it is in the movies. And we were watching a movie 2 nights ago, and that movie was Only You. And somebody in the movie said that. So I just thought it was quite fitting for this talk. And a few days ago, we were going through some pictures and we stumbled across this particular picture, which I think is a really good looking picture. We look like we're having a good time. He's got his thumbs up there, and we were actually on our honeymoon at that stage. So it looks like a typical honeymoon picture. But if we reflect on what was actually happening on that day, it wasn't as it seems in the picture. Clinton was feeling really seasick, and I was getting really cold, and I was feeling a bit miserable. The weather was extremely unpredictable. It was rainy, it was cold, the sea was really rough, and we just were not having a good time. And if I'm honest, the only thing that saved that day was meeting different people on that particular boat that we were on, or cruise that we went on. And it was a family, actually, that when we started talking to them, we really connected, and that helped to just forget about the situation around us. So I bring that in because relationally, we had a good experience on that trip. But otherwise, if we didn't meet those people, we would have walked away thinking that was really a terrible time. And why I also put this picture up is to move on to talk a little bit about what you see, what expectations we have about relationships. So if I think of myself when I was a teenager, I used to watch movies like Dirty Dancing and Grease, and I would absolutely be in love with them. To the extent that my friends and I would sing the songs, we would act out the scenes, we would know the lines. And I was just reflecting with my husband yesterday, in both of those movies, the man in that scenario is kind of a bad boy, and the lady, or the star of that particular show was a lady who was in need of some kind of rescue as well. And it just makes me think of the roles and the expectations that we are exposed to, and it develops how we think we should be. And going back to Pastor Dion's comment about, not to put each other in a mold of how we think we should be. And that also then speaks to ourselves, is looking at ourselves as, how should we be in relationship? Maybe sometimes if we take those shoulds away, it frees us up to just be ourselves, and also to accept our loved ones as they are, instead of trying to change them or mold them. So expectations can be quite dangerous sometimes. And I just want to challenge you to just think about your expectations of your loved ones, and to make sure that they're not causing harm. And social media can have or create a sense of expectation as well. When we go on Facebook and we see all these lovely couples and families going on holidays and doing wonderful things, we don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. And that's why I chose this particular picture, is because it looks really lovely, but we weren't having the best time. And that can happen so often in social media, and we compare ourselves to others, and we think a good relationship has to look good in these kinds of ways, and that's not often the case. So I've put the reality hits, in general. With all the people that we love, we have to have a realistic understanding of who they are, and embrace who they are, and allow ourselves to be ourselves with our loved ones as well. If I think of gender roles and tradition there as well, in studying psychology, we really do this whole thing of opening up gender roles, and we become a little bit of an activist in I won't be like that, and I won't fit into a stereotype of any sort. And I must be honest, when I myself got married, I found these traditions and gender roles coming in a very sneaky way. And I've had quite a few conversations with my husband about these different roles and traditions, and how do we want our relationship to be, and what traditions and roles do we want to honor, and which ones don't we? Because some of them are harmful, but we honor traditions because they are passed down. And sometimes we can look at traditions and see which ones are harmful, which ones are not worth keeping alive in our relationship. Okay, and then again, that speaks to those shoulds as well. That can really just be limiting and boxing. So yes, so we understand that life is not how it is in the movies. There is a reality. We have a human being that is in relationship with us, that we have to accept and embrace who they are and not try and change them. And sometimes when we do that, we allow people to grow in their own way. So yeah, thank you for that slide, Tanya. We can go to the next one. Okay, so you can make this one a bit bigger. Thank you. Family. So for this talk, I was really wanting to make it about more than just couples. If I think of relationship, I think of so many different kinds of relationship. And when I found this picture on the internet, I really liked that it was almost like a multi-generational picture. It wasn't just one little unit. And sometimes family can be multiple people in our lives, not just our immediate family that lives in the home with us. But it is a sense of support and a structure of people that are around us that we can lean on. So when we think of family, and I want to ask a very key question, and I want you to just reflect this. How much power do you hold as a family member? And it seems quite a strange question, but in just reflecting, we can take notice that as a mother, as a father, as a son, as a daughter, as a niece, as a nephew, as an uncle and aunt, and all the different kinds of roles that we can play in family, there is a certain power that we have, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. As a therapist, a lot of the time I sit in a room with clients, and they can share experiences of their loved ones when they were little, in their current lives. And a lot of the time, the experiences they share are relational experiences. When I can clearly remember when my mother when I was this age and my mother did this or said that. Those are relational memories that we have, and they can have so much power over us. Um, so just a call to really reflect on whichever role you play in your home, in your life, just to realize that there is power that you hold as a family member. Families, even if they really don't get along, there's a sense of importance, and there's a sense of what that person says to me, how that person acts towards me is really influential. And I can think of even the father of psychology, Sigmund Freud. He didn't have a very good relationship with his father. And after his father passed away, he wrote about how he cannot describe the void that was left after his father passed away. And that even though he didn't have a close relationship with him, somehow the power of his father not being there impacted him in a way that he couldn't understand and he couldn't describe. And that just really brings me back to that understanding that each person in your family, each person that is close to you, has some form of power in your life. They have some ability to impact you in a certain way. And it can be positive or negative, but definitely just to reflect on yourself. And we can only really change ourselves. We can only really take responsibility for how we act, what we say, what we do in relationship with others. So just think about that. Your words, your actions have so much power for your family members. And sometimes we don't think that's the case. If I think of little children and seeing the way they look at their parents with these massive googly eyes, just thinking, you are amazing, and every word that you say is, there is no other right or wrong. It's just your word. And I think parents sometimes can underestimate how much power they have in their children's lives. So those words of affirmation, or I've written here, feeling safe. You have the power as well to help family members feel safe. You have the power to help family members feel heard and acknowledged, to feel trusted. Where do we learn about how to be in relationship but from our families? And that's why I really love this quote is, we are born in relationship, we are hurt in relationship, but we can also heal in relationship. But we have to be able to take that responsibility for ourselves. If I think of a little child that parent is continuously on, we call it maybe helicopter parenting, where they don't give their child the space to do anything independently, that child might grow up thinking, does she trust me? Does he trust me to thank you? And I will definitely touch on that a little bit later, Peter. Do they trust me to do what I need to do? That sense of my mom and my dad, my guardians, my uncle, my aunt, my family trusts me just to do the right thing is so powerful, because when your family can trust you, you can ultimately trust yourself. And I mean, in working with people on a therapeutic level, sometimes when there isn't that trust, we have to learn how to develop that trust in ourselves. Because we may have had difficult experiences in the past, but it doesn't mean that we can't heal. And that's why I think therapy is such a powerful tool, because it is also a relational space. So we're born in relationship, we get hurt in relationship, and we can heal in relationship. And I think that's why I am also so passionate about relationship, is because I've seen how powerful it can be, whether it's in a therapeutic context, whether it's in a family context, relationship in terms of couples. I think relationships have so much power to heal brokenness and wounding. Yeah. And then I want to, and Peter, thank you. You mentioned substance abuse. I'm going to move on at the moment to addiction, staying with the slide, because I didn't want this talk to be too prescriptive. I wanted to be a little bit more open and just more discussion than really academic or prescriptive. Okay. So there's another question, and we will address some of the questions a bit later. So I'm just going to touch on addiction a little bit, and just to stimulate your thinking about addiction. There's so many different theories and tools that you can use, and I know AA works quite well, and all sorts of, there's so many different platforms, and I'm not going to mention all of them. But what I want to do today is, because we're talking about relationships, I want to think about addiction in terms of relationship, in terms of the relational space that we have within ourselves and with others. So could I say, and this is just putting something out there for us to think about, could we say that, what if addiction is more disorder of connection rather than of substance? And I'm not making this a truth. It's just a challenge, and it's just a question. If I think of attachment theory, it's a theory that looks at your relationships from the moment you are born. You are born into a relationship with your mother, with your caregiver, with your father, your family members around you. You're born into a relationship. And with attachment theory, there's the understanding that you have to have a secure base. So somebody in your life is that secure base for you. It could be your mother or your father or your aunt or caregiver, guardian, grandmother, anybody that takes that responsibility for you as a little person, that when you go out into the world, you're playing outside, something happens, you get hurt and injured, you go back to your secure base and you feel good again. So you find your balance again. You go back out into the world, something happens, good or bad, you come back to your base and you feel good and okay. And it makes sense in this. We live in homes. We go out to work, we come home. It's our safe place. It's a secure base, basically. But if we think of relationships where the security is not there isn't that sense of feeling valued or feeling heard or feeling trusted, then it's hard to go out into the world, do something, experience something difficult, something good or bad, and then come back and you don't feel that sense of security. And it's just a question to wonder, what if, addiction is finding a new kind of secure base, one that doesn't judge, but that gives you special powers of some sort. So if you go to your substance, and then you feel that's your security. So you go out into the world, you have your life, your experiences, something goes wrong, something goes right, and you go back to this new secure base. And it's just a question. I'm not saying that that's really what happens, but it's a new thought trend at the moment, is just to question these things that we take for granted as truth. And you can watch, we've put in the resources, and you can find some resources in the description of the talk. There's a very interesting YouTube video by Johan Hari, who talks about addiction and in terms of relationship and in terms of bonding. And yeah, so if hopefully that suffices for covering addiction, and I don't really want to go too much into that because I want to give space and room for really just discussing different elements of relationship. And I want this space to be almost encouraging and to allow for some hope that wherever you are, in whichever relationship you have, is that healing and restoration relationally is possible. And just as a side note, I didn't prepare for that, but in terms of abuse and whether it's sexual, whether it's verbal, whether it's physical, abuse in relationships is really not okay. And we have put some resources in our on our pages for anyone who is in that kind of relationship. Okay, so let's not go too much into that yet. Tanya, you can come in and just, I know you had a question earlier. You're welcome to join me again and ask that question now.
Hi, Jade. I don't know how to make us. There we go. Thanks. I think I really just wanted to ask more about how we deal with relational conflict or relationships in crisis. And I know you have touched on it in terms of the addiction and now the abuse that you've mentioned. But just generally, how would you address that? How would you explore it in terms of relationships?
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And I think my next slide does start to touch on that, and I will expand a bit on that question. We'll spend some time looking at conflict now. If you can bring up that next slide for me, thank you. Hopefully you all are okay and enjoying the talk thus far. Okay, so my next slide, and we want to talk a bit about conflict. And I want to talk about conflict in a different way today. And this different way is influenced a lot by some of the Imago Therapy model and other therapeutic models as well. Okay, so I want to bring in an idea of a survival dance. And if we think of conflict, if we think of what happens in our relationships, usually there can be these cycles that we go through where we are triggered. And I love that we did mindfulness last week because we spoke a little bit about stress and what happens in our bodies when we are in a stressful situation. It triggers our response, our natural response to fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, and the same response can happen when we are in relational difficulty as well. Relational stress is also a form of stress. So when we are in this kind of stress, our bodies get triggered as well as our emotions and everything else, and we go into a form of fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. And this can then trigger the survival dance of whether it's couples, whether it's family members, really just looking at trying to survive, and you trying to be heard, and you're trying to be acknowledged. And generally people get louder and louder because they don't feel heard. And shouting then happens, but neither of the two people who are engaged in some form of conflict are actually being heard. They are both in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, and they are trying to survive in this stuck experience that they are having, this conflict or difficulty that they're having. So this then brings me to an idea as well around, thank you, Lisa. Okay, so around being a pursuer, what role do you take in relationships, and how do you get heard? There's an important question, and I'm not sure if it was Brene Brown or somebody asked this question. You know, what did you have to do to receive love from your parents? Basically, did you have to shout more, be more seen, be more heard, take care of their needs? We learn how to survive through our early relationships. And that goes back to that saying again. We are born in relationship. We are hurt. We also have really good relational experiences. And then we can also heal in relationships and continue to grow in relationships as well. So if we think of our relational roles, and this is an idea as well that comes from Imago Therapy, is there can be a pursuer and a withdrawer. And I've got these images there of a tiger and a tortoise, and of this these two people doing their survival dance. One is pushing, one is withdrawing. And just to maybe allow you to think about in your relationship, whether it be romantic, whether it be parental, any kind of relationship, which role do you take? Do you have to really pursue the other person and make sure that they hear you and make sure that things happen in the relationship? Or do you take a back seat in a sense and step back and go into that? If you think of the tortoise as shell, you go internal and you just keep quiet and wait for the storm to pass. Or are you like that tiger that takes that tortoise and shakes it and tries to knock its shell and say, come out, I need us to work through this. I need to get to a resolution right now. And the tortoise goes inside and says, no, not right now. And that would probably be a freeze or flight, running away. And the tiger might take that stance of fight. We've got to fight to be heard, to be seen, to get resolution. Okay, so just think a little bit about your relationships and what role do you take? Do you pursue more or do you withdraw more? And I found this really fascinating with some couples when I have them in my room, is to stand next to each other and then for the one to take a step back and the other one to take a step forward. And then just to say, what does that feel like? And let them just take notice of what is happening in the space between them. And maybe for one to take a step back, and what does that feel like? When to take a step forward, and what does that feel like? And to just really take notice, what are the roles that we find ourselves in our relationships? Do we engage or do we pull away? And it can be really frustrating, but it can be really powerful if you tend to engage more and to pursue more and take that step forward and be that tiger. To take a step back, it's really hard because from little we learn how to engage in relationships. So we're challenging ourselves to do something slightly different and to stretch and grow. So do you take a step back and see what happens and allow that tortoise in their own time? And sometimes it can take long and you get frustrated, but just to take that step back and let that person come out in their own time. And when they feel safe, then they will engage. And then you can engage and get the answers that you need as well. And it happens both ways. Sometimes the tiger really needs that tortoise to step out of their shell and make that step forward. And that can then help with feeling safe, help with feeling loved, feeling heard, feeling seen, and just acknowledged. Okay, and then just, yes, taking notice of the space between. Tanya, if you can make that a little bit bigger. Thank you. Okay, so just wanting to reflect on what happens in the space between. If you are watching with a loved one, maybe just take some time to look at each other where you are right now and just take notice. What do you feel in the space between you? And just say words that you can of things that you notice. So maybe you're sitting with your daughter and just take notice. What is there? There's love, there's intrigue, there's all sorts of things. Just use this time to do that experiment. Take notice of what's happening in the space between you. And often we are so caught up with day-to-day living, moving. We really don't take notice of what's happening in the space between us and our loved ones. And just to really consider, if there's tension, if there's difficulty and hardship or misunderstanding in that space, how can we get rid of those things and clear the space so that we can feel more connected? And something really powerful that I learned is, the space between parents, that is the space that their children live in. So when there's conflict, children are very much aware of it and they live in that space and they learn their own survival skills of how to survive in that space. So just to take notice of your relational space and what's happening around you. Does it feel safe? Does it feel secure? And what can you actively do to clear the space and make it feel safer and make it feel more secure for the people that are around you and for yourself as well. Okay. And just to end this slide with this realization is that relational awareness, when you become aware of yourself, it empowers you to know that you have a choice. Is that you don't have to be hooked into that survival dance all the time and just go with the flow and be the tiger or the tortoise continuously. Is that you do have a choice and that you can step out of that shell and try something different, or you can step back and try something different and become aware of what's happening in the space between you. And you can take responsibility for making yourself and those around you feel safer relationally. Okay. So thank you for that part. Tanya, you can go to the next slide. Okay. And this is the end of my slideshow. And after the slide, I will get Tanya and Marilise to join me and we'll look at questions and open up the discussion a little bit more. Okay, so I want to end off when a realization, and I'm not sure where I saw this, but relationships can also live forever. So somebody that's passed away, you can still be in relationship with them. A relationship can also change after somebody's died. So maybe you've had a difficult experience with somebody that you lost. Because you know that person, you're able to call on their voice. You're able to call on their memory. You're able to call on an experience. And something that I like to do with some clients who've lost a loved one is to say, in this moment, in this present moment, if you think of that person that you love, listening to this conversation and sitting next to you, what do you think they would say to you? What do you need them to say to you? So we can get that affirmation that we needed or words that we needed from a loved one, even after they've gone. So just to think a bit about that is that relationships live forever and you can actually still engage with them after somebody is gone. And Marilise will touch a little bit about grief next week as well. And that's Uncle Shadley, my uncle. Thank you very much. He actually had a post of his late mom on his Facebook yesterday, and it just made me think a little bit more that our loved ones are still somehow very important and a big part of our lives. My husband himself yesterday was talking about memories of his late dad, and those memories become alive once we talk about them. And they can still feed us. They can still, in the present moment, give us what we need. So I'm going to end with that thought. Relationships live forever. And I'm going to invite Tanya and Marilise to join me again. Thanks. Hello, Marilise.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Tanya. Okay. So, ladies, I want to ask you a quick question. And maybe we can start with Marilise, what stood out for you from the talk as you were listening? Because I just want to create the reflective space.
I think two things stood out very nicely for me. It is where you spoke about a marriage being a journey and a relationship being a journey as well, because we are so brought up with a fairy tale of saying they all lived happily ever after. But what happens in ever after? That is when the real journey actually starts. I come to mind was that image of donkeys sitting in the back of Shrek's pumpkin on their way to Never Everland. And he kept on asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And I think that is what a bit of relationships are like. It's always asking yourself, are we there yet? There's still so much of the journey. And I took out from there just to settle into the journey and enjoy the ride. And when the bumps come, just go up with the bumps and settle back in, because it will get better. And then the second thing I took out, if I've got time to say a second thing, is we are born in relationships, we are hurt in relationships, and we can heal in relationships. I think that was so profound. Peter mentioned Gabor Mate, and Gabor Mate says that trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you when the bad things happen to you. So when those bad things happen in a relationship, whether it be with parental or significant other or any part of relationship, because life is relationships, we tend to close ourselves off.
Yeah.
And we forget that we can also heal in relationships. And I think that is the profound part, because with Gabor Mate, he speaks about a lot about that attachment and how you can fix that attachment again. So it's about finding that significant relationship, whether it be with a therapist or a friend or anybody that can help you heal and in that relationship. So
Wonderful.
just a few things I took out. Thank you. Brilliant talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilise. And Tanya, what
Yes.
did you pick up?
Thanks very much. I've actually really enjoyed it, and I loved some of these comments about how profound it is. I really feel that you've dealt with this subject in a really special and safe way. So I think what's come through to me is the safety and the security that we can really dwell in our relationships, and how to treat them with respect. I think that's come through very strongly. I loved the part of the Imago process where you spoke about the tiger and the tortoise, and how to deal differently, change the dance. We hear about that
Yeah.
often in relationship. If you can just change the dance instead of continuing to repeat the same old pattern and getting the same old results, um, figure out a way to really change it. And I think you've given us lots of food for thought in how we can treat our relationships with respect. And I love how you ended off with relationships live forever. We still have those links. We still have that way to experience that love or that nurturing relationship which can no longer present. That might have had.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And it just gives me the idea that, as you take a different part, so all the listeners will also take a different part. So let's look at some of these questions. Lisa George says, "Hi Jade, raising children effectively requires a balanced and positive relationship with their parents. But if the one parent is hardly at home due to work demands or other issues, how does one deal effectively with teenage children? I've tried setting clear boundaries with my daughters, and it's quite a challenge." Okay. I'm just wondering if maybe one of the others has something they want to add before I tackle that question.
I think that what struck me when I read that question is if one doesn't have control over it. I mean, obviously at different times of our lives, one or both parents might have work requirements that are difficult to handle and difficult to change. But if both of you are on the same page, if both of your daughters know clearly that where they stand and both of you deal with it in the same approach, then even when the one is not present, I would believe that the children or the daughters would hopefully know, because I think you actually made it very clear just now, Jade, with that the children live in that space in between. So if there's conflict between the parents and expectations or unmet needs, or perhaps emotional distress, then I could imagine that this would be difficult. I don't know if that's if that's valid comment that I made.
Okay. Thank you for that, Tanya. And I'm also just thinking, maybe if it's just something that is demystified in the home and that is just spoken about openly with the parent that is not there often, and to ask, does this affect you if mom or dad is not at home as much as you would like? And how can we make some special time for each other when mom or dad is at home, or guardian, or whoever it is. So just to bring it up and talk about it, instead of allowing that thing that's in that space that doesn't have a voice yet, just to give it a name and a voice, and to work with it, and to be, for feelings to be heard and seen. Yeah. So with teenagers, there's an idea that affirmation and just radical acceptance of what they feel and what they think can really help, because we understand being a teenager as a stormy phase. And I can imagine it is hard, but most parents know that it's hard, and sometimes just to say it, just to be okay with the hardness, takes away some of that power. Okay. Was there another question? Okay. Clinton, how does a person deal with feeling like his voice is never heard when a family makes decisions, but when things go wrong, he's held liable? Okay. So this again speaks to me a little bit about that survival dance and the dynamics that play out in families. And really, we can only take responsibility for ourselves and to become aware of our own part in the dance, and then to take responsibility for that part of the dance. So where there is that situation in where you might retreat into your shell from that, or to fight, it's just to wonder, how can I do this differently this time? Okay. So thank you. And then Lisa, again, thanks, Tanya, very much. Hit the nail on the head. And thanks, Jade. Appreciate your responses. Lovely. Thank you for the questions. They help keep us going. Any other comments? Gertie Green says, wow, how do we handle relationships in social distancing and not being able to visit loved ones? Marilise and I actually chatted a bit about that this morning, where we were feeling the distance between ourselves and our loved ones. And I think, if I think of my own family, we've Zoomed a lot more. We've used Zoom a lot more. We are phoning each other a lot more, and really just stretching ourselves to make contact with people that where maybe we would shy away or wait for a gathering, is to just make contact, use your phone, use the platforms that are available. Okay. Oh, Clinton says thank you. Antoinette says thank you. Living forever. I live that daily. Okay. So I know Antoinette is my mom's cousin, and a while ago lost her mom, and we can honor that memory of our loved ones daily, keeping them and their voices close to us. Okay. Just thinking about the children when they start school, how hard it's going to be for them, definitely. And home has probably become such a safe place. Going to school might feel unsafe. So it's really up to parents to help transition that process. I don't know if Marilise or Tanya wants to add anything there as well.
I actually had this conversation with someone as well. And I think it's to remember that you as parent is trying your best right now. There isn't a rule book to say how you must handle this. We've never experienced a lockdown. A lot of people have never experienced such an extended period of time where they've had to be at home with everybody. And some children have actually become to enjoy that. It's become their comfort zone. They want to stay at home with their parents. So it is going to be very difficult for them in a sense to return, but it's coming back to that base of relationship, having a sound relationship and talking to them about it. So if they do feel uncomfortable, if they do feel unhappy, let them be able to voice it to you, or write it down in a little poem, or let them do a song or a dance or a picture. As long as they know that they felt heard, not hurt, but that they can express their hurt, but that you as a parent, please know you're trying your best and you're doing your best right now. Okay. Tanya, anything from your side?
Yeah, no, I agree with both of those suggestions. I think it's going to be very hard for the kids, but they are resilient. And if we can communicate, if we can, as parents, discuss our concerns, and that, sorry for that feedback, I'm not sure that it happened, but yeah, discuss our concerns and how we've dealt with it, because we are the role models for our children. So if we can discuss it with them and make them feel safe, then that will have a knock-on effect. I think it's going to be hard for them going back to school and learning new ways of being with their friends. I don't know if there's any easy answers for that.
Definitely. And I think that's what Antoinette is saying, is how will they relate to others? And it will be really hard not hugging friends, high-fiving, all of that, but they will also adapt. And it might be really nice to just have a conversation with their friends, even if there's a social distance, just to see and hear. Yeah. Okay. Gertie, how do you unlearn the dance in a relationship? And if I think about that question, it took probably many years to learn the dance. So you have to be patient with yourself in unlearning that dance. And it takes one step at a time, one different step at a time. And you might not always get it right. You might get caught up in the same dance again. But just to reflect on that and say, okay, I saw there where I got caught in the dance. So maybe this time I'll take a different step, or next time I will try and take a different step. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for that. So I think we are running out of time. We've got about 4 minutes left. And I want to just hear a little bit about next week's talk from Marilise, just so she can give you an idea of what we're going to have next week.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to see you next week, and I'm going to just leave the two ladies here who can handle
Thank you,
this.
Tanya.
Thank you both. Thank you, Jade. I really loved this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yes. It's been, I think, a very interesting talk, because it sort of stretches us to think about things that we haven't really thought about before, like unlearning the dance and learning a new dance, maybe a different step. So instead of doing a two-step, maybe do a waltz. Don't know. So next week's talk, I'm going to be talking about trauma and grieving the loss of normal, how we understood life to be. We've covered on it this morning, speaking about how are we going to get them to go back to school. It's going to be traumatic for the kids now, not being able to hug their friends or high five their friends. So I'm going to be talking about those type of things, going to be talking a bit about the stages of grief, because there's actually 5 stages as well of grieving this whole process. Then I will also be covering what to look for, what are some of the myths that we want to cover on, such as parenting saying, I have to do this in a certain way. It's a new way of dealing things, so don't be so hard on yourself. And then because of all of these changes, will be causing a lot of anxiety as well for a lot of people. I will also be touching on how to deal with that anxiety a bit, and it will be based on the work of Dr. Daniel Amen, which I also enjoy very much. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope to see all of you guys there. Thank you for being present today and for being here. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Jade, for your talk, and I'm handing it back to you.
Thank you. And our connection's gone a bit wonky. But thank you, everybody, for joining today, for your comments and your questions. I hope you enjoy the talk. If you've missed it, it does save directly to our pages, and there are some resources available. Thank you for that, Tanya. If you want resources, you can have a look in the description of the event. We have put those up. There's just some books to read, some YouTube videos, and just to stir your interest a little bit more if you're more interested about, or if you're interested about learning a bit more about relationships. So thank you. And next week we'll be talking to Marilise again, and she will be just covering some issues around trauma and the trauma of this new normal that we find ourselves in, and how we're grieving the loss of the old and embracing the new. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined. Thank you to Tanya and Marilise for this partnership that we've developed for this process. I'm really enjoying it. As much as it's stretching me out of my comfort zone, we all need to do a bit of stretching. So thank you, and have a lovely day further. So we're going to end the series now. Thank you to everybody for their comments. Okay.